Good morning, guys, and welcome back to our channel. I know the background is not very cute. I thought about doing it in a better background, but everyone's asleep in every room. Cody's asleep in Sparrow's room, Sparrow's asleep in Bodie's room, Bodie's asleep in a corner of my room. So this is what you guys are going to get, and I could wait, but I wanted to just make this video more comfortable, almost like I'm talking to you guys. So before I start sharing the story, I wanted to kind of remind you guys of all the things that I've said leading up to this point. I hope that none of the things that I've said will just go out the window the second that you guys hear about the addiction. Please remember how I've talked about judgment and love and self-worth, and about how bashing either me and Cody is not helpful to either of us and not what we're trying to accomplish with this story. I'm in no way trying to talk bad about him. These are just the facts of the addiction and the things that are happening. He is going to share his story later on, and he'll talk a little bit about this later on as well, but right now we had both decided that it would be best for me to share my story first. Really quick, I just want to put out a trigger warning. This story talks about addiction, multiple different kinds of addiction. So if that is something that is going to trigger you, click out of the video. If you have not seen our video on Q&A or on the judgment, please go and check those out right now first before you watch this. But I'm going to get into my story. I have it written down so that I have it factually correct, but as you guys know, I stumble over the things that I say a lot, so I'm going to do the best that I can. And if the camera cuts out because I run out of room, I'm going to have to pause it for a second and then come back. But I'm going to do the best that I can to get this all in right away. So let's get started. This is the story of addiction throughout my life, and we are going to, at the very end, be disclosing what Cody's addiction is. So I'm going to get started. Sorry guys, I'm like so hot. I turned the air down. I'm like sweating in here. Probably just because I'm nervous, but here we go. I remember it so clearly. We sat on the front porch of my grandma's house as we bit into our plums and listened to the birds chirp. My uncle opened the door and came outside. Right away he pulled out that little white piece of paper and began to line it with the greenish brown stuff. He rolled it carefully, lit it, and put it in his mouth. They say that sense of smell is closely linked with memories, probably even more so than our other senses. And to this day, I don't hate the smell, even though I should. When I smell cigarette smoke, it reminds me of some of my favorite people and the memories I had with them. I was a really quiet kid. I never said much when I was around family. I just observed. But on that day, my cousin was outside with us, and she was much different than I was, never afraid to speak her mind. Right after my uncle put the cigarette in his mouth, she sat up straight, looked right at him and said, "Can you stop?" He looked at her and had a pretty confused look on his face. After what seemed like a long time, he said, "I can't." She looked at him again and said, "If you love us, then you'd stop." I don't have any memory on what they said next or how he reacted. I just remember how I felt, so confused. And I remember thinking, he must not love us as much as we love him. Now, of course, today I know that's not true, but that's just how my 5-year-old brain thought at the time. Over the years, I don't have as many clear memories from that time. I vaguely remember the good memories I had with him, as my brother and I sat on the couch and watched boxing matches with him. I remember how my brother looked up to him and always loved him. I remember the times my dad would be gone and my mom said that he was at the hospital with my uncle, and I remember when he got sick and passed away. I remember being at his funeral and sitting with my cousins who were crying, and I remember how my brother prayed every day for the next few years that my uncle would be okay. Once I was much older, I asked some questions to fill in the blanks. When all of this was going on, I was too young to really understand much of what I saw and heard. This day I know that my uncle was a man who was addicted to cigarettes, alcohol, and drugs, and lost his life due to it. But I also know that through his addiction, he loved his family, and his family loved him. As kids, we saw nothing but a man that we looked up to and loved. Sorry, I'm already stumbling so much. Over the years that passed through, I heard many stories of other people in my family who struggled and even lost their lives due to their addictions. I learned about how my dad saw it at an early age and had a much greater understanding than I did. I saw stories of success and recovery from uncles who had gotten out of gambling, drug, and alcohol addictions. But I also saw people who were close to me ruin their lives and even lose their lives due to their addictions. It wasn't long after that I saw my favorite uncle at the time lose his life to lung cancer after years and years of smoking, and lose touch with another one of my uncles who went back into the depths of his drug addiction. Even though addiction had been scattered through my life at this point, I didn't really understand it. I knew I had a love and a connection with those who struggled. I felt for them and tried to understand why they made the choices that they did, without judgment. One day while sitting in the living room, I heard my grandma, dad, and aunt talking about my grandma's brother and the situation he was in. If I remember correctly, they had lost touch with him for quite a while and had found him in a not very great situation. The place he was living in wasn't clean or very safe, and he didn't have many things to himself. Instantly, I knew that I wanted to meet him. He was a member of my family and someone who needed help. I kept quiet for a while on my desire to meet him because I didn't think that my parents would be okay with it. Eventually, I asked without much hesitation, my dad said yes. I remember walking into the house he was living in for the first time. There was clutter and trash everywhere, and dog pee on the floor. The smell was so strong that it burned your nostrils every time that you breathed in. He had a little room in the back, and we walked back there, and I saw this tiny little man. I think at the time he weighed less than me, and that's saying a lot, because I only weighed 93 pounds. The first time I talked to him, I fell in love with this little frail old man. We became the best of friends. He would tell me all of the cool stories of being a paratrooper and a hairdresser, how he always had the best clothes and rings, and he talked about the time he was able to do Britney Spears' hair. You could see his eyes light up when he talked about the past. He loved chocolate and would always ask me to open up a chocolate bar for him, and every time I did, he would remind me that I couldn't sneak a piece without him noticing. I would go over to his place whenever my dad would go. Sometimes it was once a week, and sometimes it was more often. At this point, we all knew he wasn't going to live much longer, and I wanted him to know that he wasn't alone, and that the people loved and cared about him wouldn't judge him or the situation he was in. And I wanted to get to know as much of him as I could before our time was up. One day it became more apparent that our time was almost up. He was sent to the hospital, and I was there as soon as school was out. I remember sitting in his room talking to him, and that day he didn't say the same things about the past. Instead, he looked at me and said, "If there was one thing that I could say to young kids nowadays, it would be to never start. It's not worth it," he said. He made me promise that I would never go down the path he went down, and he wished that he could tell more people than just me, but he didn't get to. He passed away later that night. Later on, I gave the eulogy at his funeral, and I will forever remember my time with him. At the time that he passed away, he was a lot younger than he should have been, and I asked my mom. We couldn't exactly remember the age, and my dad was at work, so I couldn't get the specifics for that. So I don't quite remember how old that he was, but I know that his life was cut short due to his addiction. After this, I kind of tried to push addiction out of my mind. I didn't think about it much, and I was your regular teenager trying to figure out who I was. And trying to figure out who I was, I didn't make the best choices. One day at the beginning of the school year, junior year, we got paired into groups. One of the girls who got put in my groups was your typical religious good girl, which is great. I admired her for it, but I thought that she would judge me just as most religious people had. She was naturally beautiful, didn't wear any makeup. Her shirt covered everything. She had a church necklace on and always came in with the biggest smile on her face. In our group activity, we were making dream boards, and on hers, her biggest goal in life was to go on a church mission. She was really nice, but we didn't have much to talk about, so we didn't really talk until a couple months later. I came into class late, and there was only one seat open next to her. I sat down, and just to start small talk, I asked how she was doing. She looked at me, and she said, "Well, I could be better because I might be getting kicked out of my parents' house." Right away, I perked up, and I looked at her, and I remember saying, "Well, that's weird. Me too." I remember being so surprised. How could someone like her be getting kicked out? What could she have done wrong? Our conversation flowed so effortlessly, and after talking to her, I found out that she was addicted to multiple kinds of drugs. Probably the most surprised I've ever been in my entire life, and I'm not even kidding you when I say that. We right away became the best of friends. But of course, again, I didn't really understand addiction. I wanted to be able to do her recovery for her. I wanted to take her pain away, and I wanted it to be a simple fix. But it was anything but that. anyone that's dealt with any kind of addiction, I'm sure that you can understand all of those things that I was feeling at that time in my life. The night before she left to go to rehab, I spent with her. This was the first time I had ever witnessed any kind of withdrawal symptoms. She was shaking and sweating and would tap out every once in a while, to the point where she couldn't see or hear us. Then the shaking became more violent, almost like convulsions, and she would start to cry and shake. She explained how she was going through these out-of-body experiences, and sometimes was scared about them. I hated seeing this. I was scared for her, I was in pain for her, and I wanted to make it stop. I remember telling myself I can't cry because I have to be strong for her. As I held her and told her that everything would be okay, she would get through this because she was strong, that I would talk to her every single day that she was gone. That night when I got home, I broke down and I cried and cried and cried. It wasn't long before she called me from rehab, and I was fuming, wanting to fix everything for her because she was scared after some of the treatment in the rehab center. And it wasn't long before I was finding myself late to school every single day so I could answer her call to let her know that I was there for her. After she got out, I was there for her day and night, waiting for her to call if she needed someone to drive to pick her up, to take things out of her hands, to call her parents, to give her love and support, and so on. I won't go much more into this story for her privacy, but I will tell you it was one of the hardest things that I have ever been through at that time in my life. I can't put into words the things that I learned, saw, and felt to this day, but I will tell you that this woman is a better Christian than most people I have ever met, a more loving and kind sister, daughter, and friend to those around her, a ridiculously smart individual, and someone who is much stronger than I could ever be. Her addiction did not define her worth, and she truly opened my eyes to the fact that addiction can happen to absolutely anyone. After this experience, I went to an addiction recovery for the family meeting. I heard many heartbreaking stories, and one truly resonated with me. The woman spoke of an addiction I had never heard of, and instantly I remember thinking, that has to be the worst possible addiction. I can't imagine what that would be like. And at that moment, I felt like I wanted to help addicts and their families, but I didn't know how to do it. But again, addiction faded out of my life a little bit. I had uncles that I was losing again to their addictions, but ones who were also being recognized for their sobriety and recoveries in local newspapers. There were hard times again, but I mentally and emotionally kind of detached and didn't really think much about it. In the effort to save time, we're going to kind of skip forward. You know all about how Cody and I met, and you know about our wedding story, and that leads up to this point. I honestly don't remember the day that it finally clicked with me that this was an actual addiction. I remember at first thinking that it was a quick fix. He cried, he felt bad. He took the steps to turn his life around. We tried to mend our relationship, we saw counselors, and it wasn't that big of a deal. But one day I knew. It clicked and it made sense that he had an addiction. So this is the part where I tell you guys what the addiction is. And again, I hope that you think back to the things that I've said in the past about judgment and loving, and how your mistakes don't define your worth, and how they don't define Cody's worth either. I hope that you remember that it's okay to have doubt, it's okay to have thoughts and provoking questions, but to please pose them as questions and not as something in a way of trying to hurt us. The addictions that Cody has struggled with are a sexual addiction and a spending addiction. Now, these are both things that I never thought were actual addictions until they came into my life and into my marriage. I didn't think they were possible, or I thought it would be obvious to pick up from a mile away. When I first found out, I thought that it was a pornography addiction, which again, I didn't even know that was possible until my marriage. And later on, I found out that the whole time I had known him, it was past the point of pornography addiction and had crossed over into a sexual addiction. Due to his addictions, I have lost jobs, had to go back to work 1 week after having a baby, have had to have a C-section, and there have been many, many times where we were not able to have an intimate relationship for many reasons, including the fact that there wasn't a moment in our relationship, dating or married, that he was faithful, and that there were hundreds of other people included in our relationship. There were many physical, emotional, and spiritual repercussions in this time that have taught us about love, pain, humility, and strength. I don't have much time to go into this in this video, since I took a while leading into it, but I want to state that these are addictions. I'm going to put this paper down because it makes it seem like I'm not being real. I don't have a lot of time to go into his addictions, or to say everything that I want to say on it, or to be able to explain it. But in explaining it, I always felt like I had to defend myself. And like I've said before, we don't have to defend ourselves. So I'm going to leave it at that for this video, but I want to say that these addictions are nothing like you could think that they would be like. Like I said, when I first heard about pornography addiction, I was like, that's not possible. It's not that big of a deal. How could that cause problems? I thought all of the things that everyone else thinks. When I heard about sexual addiction, I was like, well, that's obvious. It's going to be like this and this and this and this and this. And that is so not true. Spending addiction, again, thought it would be obvious from a mile away. I didn't understand that it would lead to us eating saltine crackers for 3 weeks straight when I was pregnant, or all of the repercussions. When I found out about sexual addiction, I didn't think that there was any physical repercussions, or that it could really hurt somebody else that badly. I didn't know all of the different things that lead up to it, all of the red flags. I didn't understand how it affected the other person, or if it could. I honestly didn't think it. And leading up to this video, I have had, a whole month of time since I told you guys that it was coming up, of thinking about how you guys are going to react. And I know no matter what I say, we're going to get all types of awful comments and things like that. But I ask those of you who are not out to just hurt and cause pain to other people, or you're not out to just be vicious or malicious or mean, to pose your thoughts as a question, to ask a question instead of putting the blame on either Cody and I. I've thought through the fact that people are probably going to say, oh, it's her fault because maybe she wasn't enough for him, or she didn't give him this, or maybe she was controlling, or what does she mean it could cause physical repercussions? How did that make you have a C-section? How is that even possible? Or, why did you stay with him if you knew that there's other people in your relationship? Why did you have kids with him if you knew this? So many other questions, either blaming me or blaming him. And the truth is, I don't want the blame to be put on either of us, and I know that no matter what, people of the internet are going to. But like I said, just ask questions and we will answer them. We will be having a Q&A. I will be explaining this a lot more in other videos because I know that it needs to be done. Not just for our sake, but for others. I know when I put out the divorce video, I was terrified. Not terrified, but I honestly thought that we would be alone in this addiction. Or not alone, but there wouldn't be as many people as I thought. And we have talked about it before. We've had hundreds and hundreds of emails, Instagram messages, all types of people reaching out to us, and I have been extremely surprised to know that 99% of these hundreds of emails have been the same addiction. And it's been people who are either very sexual beings themselves or not at all. People who are who thought that pornography was a problem, or who didn't think pornography was a problem. People who had open relationships, didn't, or it's all over the board. It's men, it's women, it's people who are married, who aren't married, who have kids, who don't have kids. It's people who are blindsided, or people who knew, all these different kinds of things. But there are hundreds and hundreds of you out there that are in the same position. One of my biggest fears with releasing this addiction and the story is that those of you who don't have the same addictions will feel like you are left out. But I want to state that that is not the case. Addiction is addiction. It is hard no matter what. No matter if it is gambling, drug, alcohol, cigarettes, sex, whatever, pornography, it doesn't matter. Addiction is addiction, and it is hard. It is hard for the addict, and it is hard for the spouse, the family member, the friend that has to go through it with them. My spouse may not be a drug addict, he may not be an alcoholic, but I've seen that in my life over and over and over again. The beginning of my story, I left out so much of it. I didn't go really deep with it. I tried to keep it as basic as we can because I didn't want to drag it on forever. But I have witnessed and experienced every addiction, from gambling, sex, pornography, alcohol, cigarettes, drugs. I've seen them all. I may not know everything about addiction. I may not have as deep of a story as you, but I am here to support you no matter what your addiction is. I'm here to give you resources and to help you and to love you. I am here to remind you that you have worth, whether you are the spouse who is feeling like you are not worth enough, and feeling like you did something wrong to deserve this, or feeling like you are not loved enough, like my little 5-year-old brain thought, for them to give up their addiction. Whether you are the addict who has made so many mistakes that you almost can't forgive yourself, you have worth. And I'm going to start crying, so whew. I just wanted to remind you guys again of that each and every one of you have worth, that we are here to love and support each other, no matter the addiction, no matter the hardship throughout your life. There are things that we can all learn together and grow from together. So I hope that you guys choose to stick around. I understand if you don't. I know that this is something really taboo. This is something that nobody talks about, and this is something that we are changing, and we're giving you guys a piece of our life, and we're not trying to air our dirty laundry. We're trying to be honest and open and hope that our story can help somebody else, and be thankful that other people's stories have helped us to this point. So thank you guys for the love and support that you have given us to this point, and for sticking around and for hearing our story and hearing us out. And I hope that each and every one of you can continue to love and support others and see others for who they truly are, and not for their mistakes, not for their addictions, not for their past or who they are, but for who they truly are. Gosh, I cannot talk. But that is the end of this story. We are going to be announcing the winners of the giveaway that we did a couple weeks back in our next video. Like I said, we will be doing a Q&A, so if you guys have any questions, please leave them down below. And remember, love yourself and love others. Thank you for watching.